Good evening. Welcome all. I am Dora from Fundação Bienal, and before the curatorial team, I'd like to say a few words. This meeting is part of the public programmation for the 34th Bienal. It's made in partnership with Bienal and Poiesis, who administrates this Oficina Oswald Andrade. What we aim with these meetings is to bring people that work at the 34th Bienal to share their reflections and processes with us. This is the 6th meeting here at Oficina with the entire curatorial team for this Bienal. Before start, I would like to invite you all. The 34th Bienal has a different format, different from the previous editions. And we'll have 3 individual exhibitions and performances before the collective exhibition that will open in September at the Bienal Pavilion. The first exhibition, which is part of this 34th Bienal, with Jimena Garrido Leca, inaugurates next Saturday, 9 a.m. at the 3rd floor of the pavilion, and at 11 a.m. also on Saturday we'll have a performance by Neo Muyanga. So I'd like to invite you all to join us. So thank you all for being here, and now we'll hear Jacopo Crivelli Visconti, the General Coordinator, Curator for 34th. Thank you, Dora. Good evening. Thank you very much for being here. It's a great pleasure for us to be here in São Paulo to present in Bienal in a more complete way. We have already announced a few things in several moments through the press. But it's the first time that we have the opportunity to speak all together about the Bienal and tell a little bit of how it's been thought and constructed, let's say. With a few issues, as you may notice. Well, excuse us, we'll try to do our best. We decided to do a group presentation because this project, since the beginning, has been thought as a dialogue between all of us and also with all the institutions and artists, several partners in this project. So since the beginning, this project was conceived in a tactical way. There are several aspects that have the same importance, and it's very hard to start speaking about them, because to understand them, it's important to understand all these aspects. So it would be impossible to speak about all today, but we chose 5 aspects that we find important. Could be more or less, but that's a way to introduce a few concepts for this exhibition, how it's been thought. The first aspect may be the most useful as an introduction. Since the beginning, Bienal was thought for the city of São Paulo in a way that I would say very generous. It lasts for an entire year. In February, we'll start the activities, and in a top moment, September, December, we will expand to the entire city. On Saturday, we will inaugurate the first exhibition and performance from Neo Muyanga. In April, we'll have another exhibition and performance, and in July, the same. The second moment for Bienal, an exhibition from Clara Iani and a performance by Leon Ferrari, an exhibition, a performance that's been performed elsewhere. Then we'll have Diana Lawson with an action Parangolé by Hélio Oiticica, a project that he made in life but has never been done before. And the idea of creating these initial moments not only to expand it in time. All the exhibitions that will be on the individuals will come back on the collective. So the exercise we propose is for you to get in touch with the work of these artists individually, to dive and understand their poetics and the directions that they take, and then afterwards, and after a few break, with a fresh memory of what they have experienced, get in touch with it again in a exhibition that is collectively join side by side other works with several themes that we're going to explore, and we'll tell a little bit how it's going to happen. That will make you read that work differently. The idea of reading differently depending on what's around it, it's a bit of our initial motto for this Bienal. The idea of the relationships that build the meaning of the works of people, of context, that's fundamental for us. And starting in September, we will have a very similar exercise in a network of 26 institutions through the city that we are establishing partnerships. And most of them will have individual exhibitions of artists that are present at the Bienal. So we'll be able to dive into the production of an artist and find this work again differently at Bienal. Or the opposite, find an artist at Bienal and then have a unique opportunity, which is rare in this environment, to be able to go somewhere else in the city and get to know better the work of this artist. So the image that's behind me, it's a Bienal that's really thought differently from others, not Bienals from elsewhere in the world. It's thought for a local audience. If they want, they will be able to get in touch with everything that Bienal has been doing and understand as the time goes by, how meanings are getting wider and different and even more complex, which is what we want more with such a big event thought for São Paulo. So it's possible to create this challenge that we're trying to answer. Is it possible to create a Bienal that is able to speak to so different audiences? For me, speaking a bit about my background, I'm Italian. I've been in Brazil. It's been almost 20 years, and I've worked for several years at Bienal. One of the most exceptional things it has is the diversity of audiences it receives, of classes, of interests, of origins. That's so great compared with Europeans Biennales that we know. So in this sense, we're not saying that that's the only possible answer, but that's one possible answer for this complexity of Bienal. We search for a diversity that's very broad. So since institutions that are very well established, as MASP, Pinacoteca, MAN, institutions that are central in the contemporary art system here in São Paulo, to independent places with a smaller budget or practices that are different, like Oficina where we are, Casa do Povo nearby, Pivot, and other spaces that you certainly have been. But there are places that have a small or acting in the system of contemporary art, but have a huge importance in the community where they act as a space for formation, like Sesc Interlago, Sesc Carmo, that are in very complicated regions. So it's very different ways to relate with the regions where these institutions are. So we understand that potentially the audiences of each of these institutions are the audiences for Bienal. So we are trying to construct a Bienal that is able to dialogue at the same time and differently with several audiences, with different propositions, different projects. But exactly because the project is so complex, we want the works to be exhibited in Bienal to be more inviting. So we have a series of different tracks that go back to what I said in the beginning. It's a complex paratactical structure with equivalent importances, and that we'll try to explain a little bit each one of us. So Carla Zaccagnini will speak now, artist and curator. She will speak about another aspect that's very important that we consider very important. Good evening. Thank you, Jacopo. It's so beautiful to see you all from here. Come near. That's better. I'll tell you a little bit how we've been working throughout this year together, constructing this Bienal, and the moment where we are now. Actually, it was a very interesting process, as it was proposed by Jacopo and developed. It's been developing. Our starting point, when we first met, many of us didn't know each other. The first time we met, we spoke we were in a table, and each one of us brought 10 to 15 artists or works that we thought would be important to see or to show in this moment, in this place. And having this as a start point, how each one of us presented these artists and the words that has been used to describe these relationships between what one presented and the other one, we realized a few issues, a few preoccupations showing up and that repeated themselves, that were constant, that would come back to our speeches and brought by these works. So we reorganized all these ideas and did a new round where each one of us again presented 10 to 15 works, researchers, artists that would were called by this first conversation that related artists that related to the artists presented with the issues presented, the very diverse relationships as having that first conversation and a start point. So the second round where we spoke about these issues is that we managed to diagnose what were these subjects, these issues that repeated themselves in our desire to bring to São Paulo Bienal, in the sense that they were important to be discussed now and here. So then we started delineating what were these subjects, in a way trying very interestingly, we didn't find as a concept a word that would define it, but trying to realize what was this magnet, this grouping. It was easier for some, harder for others. Try to detach of a definition of a concept that would organize these groups that started coagulating. And then we search for other artists, other works that would make this more clear. We are still in this moment, I guess. We are still defining what are these groups. And what we found as a grouping element, a magnet, are a few elements with history, in general objects, or a group of objects with a story. They are charged with a narrative that gives them a meaning. One of them, I'll give you one example. It's this bell. It's from a chapel from Ouro Preto from 1750, done in Germany and brought to this chapel in Ouro Preto, one of the first from the city. By the time it was called Vila Rica. And it's separated from the small chapel. And why this bell? It was echoed in very important and meaningful moments of the Brazilian history. The first in 1792, when Tiradentes was executed. By that time, the traitor of the crown, now a national hero. When Tiradentes was executed, they forbid all the bells from ringing. And they say that during the night, they heard the sound of this bell in this chapel. In 1960, when Brasilia was inaugurated, the futuristic capital of this country, when it was inaugurated, they had this idea of ringing a bell, this bell, from Ouro Preto to Brasilia, for it to be heard in the square of the Three Powers. So it's an object that somehow is charged of a memory, having these two roles, a clandestine one, then an official one, of showing with this abstract sound these two moments of the history of this country. So I won't say anything else. That's because that's what it's all about. So I ask Paulo to speak a little bit about the words. So these announcements, as an alternative for not using concepts from the dictionary, from the academic world, but to have a relationship that is more effective, more narrative, as each announcement created a sort of vibration of ideas and attitudes and thoughts that will sound through the works around. For us, the first announcement, it's the very title of Bienal, which is not exactly a theme. It's clearly not a concept. It's not like a word for the moment, like a tropoceno. Or it's a poetic announcement from Tiago de Mello, which has a story of its own. Tiago de Mello is a poet from the Amazon region, from Barreirinha, and he lived in Rio de Janeiro for several years. And between 62 and 63, he wrote a poem called Madrugada Camponesa. He started it in in the Amazonas and finished in Chile. It's a poem about hope that thought about the struggle of people from the work in the fields and the wish for a rural reform. In 62 and 3, when we had a progressive ambition in several fields of our history, the wish for literating adults, creating university in Brasilia, discussing the rural reform. And in this moment, he's interested on these field workers that have a life that's very miserable, that's been had been the same since the colonial period, but this poem was only published in 65, and Brazil's reality was then very different. When it had been closed, OLP had been dismounted, the literating plans had become something very different. Rural reform had become a prohibited word. So he published this book, this poem, but the book is called "It's Dark Though Still I Think," and saying that the morning was very far away. But in 66, Nara Leão, singer that represented counterculture and called for people to go to the streets and representing their Nara registered an album with a song that was written by Jacopo Crivelli, and it's called "Though It's Dark, Still I Think." It's different from the poem. It's not exactly for the field workers, but speaks to the youth and population, everyone that wants to work for the joy of all. And then they say again, though it's dark, still I sing, because tomorrow is coming. In 68, this youth, together with workers and several other places of people of society, had gained a presence in the media, and that generated a very quick reaction and an influx of repression. And then Jacopo Crivelli was also imprisoned. He had worked with Allende's government in Chile, so he went to prison in 68 when we know that Chile and Argentina was different, but by that time we didn't know what would happen to you. So he gets into this prison very scared, and when he looks at the wall, his verse was written on the wall by the previous person imprisoned. So then you change the sense again. It becomes a whisper of hope, a ciphered message, a bottle in the ocean. It falls over the very poet and reestablishes his hope of everything's gonna be right. So in 5 years, this poem that had so many different meanings. So our work is to bring this story and ask, what about today? Today in Brazil, how this poem can sound in the world? What is this darkness, and what kind of singing would be? I think about darkness we don't have to explain. Not only in Brazil, that's very important. We're speaking in Brazil, but it's an important moment of defining this title was talking with artists in the whole world. It's not that they say, oh yes, because in Brazil everything is going like this. No, they say, no, here things are like this, here in England, here in Korea, here in Africa. So there is a state of projects being stopped, of civilization hopes being interrupted. A collective sense of darkness. In our case, we almost had a problem because São Paulo was actually dark on the day where the ashes from the Amazon darkened literally our day. And for us, it's especially important, something that's clear when we compare this poem with several other verses. Bertolt Brecht, the German playwright, he says, in dark times, will there be singing? Yes, on dark times there will be singing about the dark times. So it's very similar, but it's not the same. And this not being the same is very important for us. It's dark, though it's dark, but I decide to sing about darkness, but also about life, desire, creation, the possibility of meetings, possibility of not being meaningful, of opacity, which is an author that has been helping us to think this Bienal. So just to finish, one thing that we've been learning with several artists from different references is that for many social groups in Brazil and elsewhere, this darkness is not new. For me, for you, it's been dark. It's been 3, 10, 20 years, 50 years. But for many groups, many stories that's been through violent cycles of our civilization, this darkness has 500, 1,000 years. And for them, the idea of singing itself, it's an act that is explosive, it's powerful, of reconfiguration of the very state. It's central in their cosmovision. So we've been learning a lot, discussing this, and learning the relativity of this time scale and physical scale of this darkness.
We're thinking now to say 2 words on how we will use the space after the introduction on the methodology we used in how to approach the Biennale. We thought it was interesting to say 2 words in how to take position into such a prominent building. We all know the pavilion designed by Oscar Niemeyer in 1954 was designed by for industrial purposes, so more on an industrial scale more than a human scale, and therefore it has been a challenges throughout the year, throughout the editions since 1956 until now. First, it's interesting to see how the whole exhibition is condensed in one module, one big building growing vertically over 3 floors, 30,000 square meters, suggesting a circulation, and the methodology we thought to follow is exactly the same methodology we approached for discussing over the artists, discussing over the different aspects and thematics which will be exposed in the Biennale. More than thematics, I would say it's an attitude, and the similar attitude is reflected in how to occupy the space. So at first we invited 3 architectural studios to make a proposal. How would they imagine the circulation over the 3 floors? How would they imagine the visitors would walk around and would engage with the space? After considerations, the studio of Andrade Morecin was the selected one, and we started the dialogue. Still, I would like to follow this terminology of the exercise together of a rhizomatic way to approach, so growing into a discourse rather than applying rules or ideas on top of desires, in a way, on top of what we aim to propose. And this led to first a fundamental aspect, that the architecture is not built in response to the artworks that will be proposed, but it's the other way around. Artworks will respond to a given space, and these spaces will be characterized by very simple and functional architecture made of inside structure that will create rooms or inside gateways that are defined by 3 degrees of opacity. So some walls will be rather transparent, other less, and other will be in PVC or in a darker material. This symbolically reflects the approach we have been taking in the selection of the artist, but also we create different degrees of density inside the spaces. So to a point where visitor might not understand exactly if they are inside a room or inside a corridor. The inside and outside will be melted, so there won't be an effect of fares, let's say, of an action to enter inside of outside of rooms. And so the main exercise is basically in response to the scale of the building rather than in responding to the needs of the works. And it will be from August onwards, the curators and the artists tasked to respond to a given architecture. A similar approach was taken for the design. So let's say the graphic identity, which will be which is being taken care by the studio of Vittorio Cesar, and again following a similar approach of opacity. And what is interesting, that opacity has been a term we have been used and is probably recurrent, which does not reflect a lack of clarity. Is rather the opposite. Is actually tending towards an openness of interpretation, tending towards a multiplicity of reading, or kaleidoscopic, as it has been said. And the first intervention of architecture will be seen on Saturday during the first opening of Jimena Garrido exhibition, and which will be then followed, as Jacopo introduced, by another exhibition in April, and the last one in July. Those spaces will be the first steps or the first stones that then will build as progressively the final space. I will pass the word to Ruth, who will speak about the last aspect.
Hola, boa noite. I'm extremely sorry that I can't speak in Portuguese. It took me almost 40 years to learn English, so I think it's going to take a lot of years to learn Portuguese. But and I thought that for this stage my Portuñol will be fine, but it's not good enough. So let's speak in English, although. So I'm going to talk about the publication, but it's also a very important aspect of this biennial. And I have to say that the Sao Paulo Biennial Reader publication somehow it reflects or is a reflection of what we are doing in this exhibition. And in a way, we are also following the same methodologies that Carla was also explaining in how the exhibition has been built. We are also working in collaboration with Elvira Diangani Jose, who is a Spanish Ecuadorian Guinean curator and writer, who is also giving somehow a different perspective. I should speak slower or closer? Okay.
Choose one. Yeah.
So this one. Before I talk a little bit about the book, just saying that we are starting, I think today, actually, like that. We are starting today. Today was the first one, actually, what we call open letters. And it's basically a sort of correspondence between us and the readers and the public that are going to be published on the website of the Sao Paulo Biennial Foundation, but also will be sent through email. And basically, we are talking about the discussion that we have between us and sharing with you, but also about, of course, the current issues that are happening today. We decided to use letter because we think letters are kind of more intimate way of thinking about things. I think letters is a sort of format where the domestic and the public converge together. So we thought the format of a letter would be much more approachable and interesting for us, but also for you. So coming back to the book, we decided, we are still far from having the book, but we decided to divide the book also in different sections. We are, of course, inviting local and international writers that will talk about specific political and social situations today. So, for instance, just to put an example, one of the themes that is not exactly a theme that will happen also in the biennial, but it's a theme that for us was important also to talk on the book. It's like, for instance, the history of disappearing in Latin America, like starting from an economy based on slavery, but also disappeared victims of the military dictatorship in countries like Brazil, Guatemala, Chile, Peru, or Argentina in the 20th century, but also like the recently killing of a lot of people also in Mexico or in Colombia by the narco traffic. So this is going to be one of the themes, but at the same time there will be also other ways, more abstract, to approach certain things. Like, for instance, maybe it will be a text about the poetic analysis of a lullaby, who is a traditional song that a lot of mothers and fathers has been using to sing to their kids in the darkness. So we will have this kind of different essays that, as I said before, some will be more abstract and other ones will be more historical or concrete in a specific situation. And we are also including a glossary of images or images/text that could be a musical score or a poem or a little excerpt from a book that has been until now important, not just to build the biennial, but again to think about the political and social circumstances of today. So I think in Latin America, everywhere, but because I live in this region of the world, things are happening really fast. I mean, in the past few months, I think a lot of things are happening, and we don't have almost time to react to what is happening. We try to react to something, and immediately something else is happening just a few days later. So for us, all this bunch of images that we are selecting is because we want to give them another opportunity to reflect about them in a different way. So for instance, just to put an example, one of these images, of course, will be or it could be still, but I will share with you some of the ideas. That, for instance, like, of course, we will have the images of Bendigo in a way when it was removed from his original place, but also will be an image from Bendigo today after the fire. But also, One of the ideas is also to include, for instance, the letters written by Afro-Brazilian historian Joel Rufino dos Santos to his 8-year-old son when he was in prison during the dictatorship in Brazil. So these letters were very colorful, they were full of drawings, they were interesting. And he was talking about the history of Brazil. He was talking about the discovery of the genocide, the indigenous people, and different things. But of course, it was a way to talk about something so his son will understand a certain circumstance. But these letters were able to go through the censorship at that moment, because he was not talking about the particular moment of the dictatorship, but was talking about another moment in history that was, again, very complicated. So most of the images selected for this section of the book will reflect about situations from the past to think about the present and the other way around. So some of them, as I said before, will help to clarify the situation, but also to give some opacity to different moments of history. So the book will also have like pages dedicated to each artist. The idea is like we will give the artist the freedom to decide how they want to appear in the book. So sometimes it will be their works, but sometimes it will be also reference. So I ensure our reference and their reference will mix, and it will try to help people to think about current moments. And finally, we are preparing also a sort of glossary of terms that will work as a sort of guide and dictionary, like definitions that we have been using during this year and a half already, that will allow different entrance to the book. So this is a little bit the explanation of the publication.
Well, thank you. Very good explanation. Now I understood everything. We prepared this and we decided not to speak too much because we wanted to enjoy this very rare opportunity, if not unique, in a moment, as Carla said. Many things are still getting defined, still have a lot of work to do, but we already have some things that are worth sharing. To hear what this arouses on those who perhaps read something but still didn't have a very global perspective on Bienal. I would really like for us to have more than just an exposition of what we are doing. I'd like to have a dialogue. This is the starting point for me. Since I spoke to them on the first place to have this work together, this is the attitude we have been having with all these institutions. A dialogue where we are listening for much longer than speaking. I think this is essential. When we're speaking to artists and reading authors from different places and thoughts, which is a way of listening as well. So if we organize this meeting today, I'd really like to hear from you questions that would certainly, besides retributing the attention that you are giving us today, that would selfishly more help us to think what would be the next steps we should take. So I'd like to open the conversation. If anyone wants to say anything, Simone will take you the mic.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you here. I thought it was excellent to centralize these spaces, to occupy other areas. And even this meeting today, very symbolic that is here. I have been other times to Bienal in other editions. And the question for you is, in the same way that you try to dislocation the space, you try to dislocate the regard, the look from the artists that are will be in this place. I believe when you talk about this location, I think this is what you're talking about. We made the effort. We did a lot of traveling, and we will try to do more to places where it's more difficult to arrive. Could you tell a little bit more about them? First, we live in very different places. Most of us, except for Paulo, live in a different place where he was born. I think this issue of this location, to use the word that you used, in our biography is very central. And beyond this, for the Bienal, we made several trips in the last semester, but we are very conscious that we're trips for places that it's easier to travel to, and entering the other details of conducting such an event. There is a very practical issue. As a curator team, you are invited to travel to a lot of places, but these places, these countries where you're invited to, are the countries in general that have a greater structure, so it's where it's easier to travel to, and many times these are the countries that will be able afterwards to help to these artists to travel. So first it was for logistics issues, but now in this moment it's to travel to places where it's more difficult, and this is the task that we have now. And beyond this, we also have a network of people and information and things that we watched and artists that we follow that goes beyond the quantity of places that we visited. And also the idea of diversity, wanting to show different aspects of contemporary production that are not so oftenly show. It's so urgent here in Brazil as it's outside. So traveling to the foreign lands, it's something that's not the point. We first have to look here inside, and this is something that we're trying to do as seriously as possible. So I think we will be able to bring a few things that were not very much seen, or that are starting to be seen very recently, and that need to be more depth. Good evening, my name is Lucia. I would like to thank you for Thiago de Mello, which is a poet so important for us in Brazil. I'd like to make a question related to the history of the Bienals between one and the other that you mentioned, Carla mentioned, of the announcement that you chose object with a narrative, with a memory. Ruth spoke about the publication and about the attention on choosing the letters. This is being very strong for us Brazilians because we really cannot sleep knowing what has happened in the night before. We don't have the capacity to think about. And I also remember that the last Bienal was an invitation to the attention, and we had the opportunity to be part of what the educational team prepared, and that's made us so attentive to this issue. And this invitation to be attentive, it was so strong in another speed, very much slower. So I would like to know if thinking on the meetings that you made for this Bienal, and as it speaks of history, memory, if you looked at to this Bienal as a string, a narrative string that links other Bienals with this. Thank you for this question. Not necessarily the last Bienal. We look to many Bienal. Actually, São Paulo Bienal is a very important institution for all of us that live here in São Paulo. For me, it was very important to all my formation, for Paulo, for Jacopo. the three of us worked in several biennales. So we already have this affection, this understanding of the art that has been through this history of the biennales. We were speaking about this. First time was that I saw contemporary art was at Bienal São Paulo. So I think that's the same for many people. We looked to several biennales. Can I tell about this? And one of the things that we considered was to show again a few artworks that have already been in other biennales as a comeback to this other biennale, but also as a reflection to this other historical moment. So what does it mean to see again something that has already been there? I think this is related specifically to this announcement that Carla spoke about, the idea that the object, the artwork, can go back in time, and the readings we do about and the meanings are different. So the ways to look at history and to understand that Bienal, and this is we say as being sons of Bienal in a more with a lot of affection. The history of Bienal is part of the history of Brazil. It's very important. So when we see there are several artworks that have been seen in the years 60s, in the 2000s, in the 90s. We are searching for other artworks as well. It's looking at them. It's a way of looking to present through past, understanding past in a different way. Glissant says that you have to have a prophetical look to the past, and this in Brazil is very easy and very immediate. So this kind of exercise is something that Bienal can do. So I think it's important to present this. The entire project for Bienal, in several points of view, goes against the way that many biennales have been organized. We are thinking of something very collective on the point of view of dialogue, and on the relationship between works. And this make us try to make us having less commissioned work. So this is a paradox. We will be able to show several artworks twice. In other editions, it would be heretic, and we have already shown. We will be showing things that have already been shown. So this would also sound heretical, but we think that it's very important in this moment to look and try to understand everything, or at least more than one reading that artwork can have. So in this moment in Brazil and in the world, very few people are available to do this. If people don't agree with us, that's because they didn't understand. No, what we're trying to suggest that you can have several readings, several understandings. So this is why you have to start this now. It's a very long, complicated exercise. Not everyone will be ready and interested in doing. So that is why we're talking about several audiences. There are audiences that will not do this exercise, and others will, and it will be very enriching. I am Kadiji. I would like to make a question related to this audience, very multiple and very different of other BNIs in the world, and the role of educational team and by reaching these other audiences. So I'd like to ask, how are you thinking the educational aspect of this Bienal? I think what you were saying is a very good question. By the very way it has been, how you stated, if you're doing an event so good, so great, in a country that is so rich, we cannot treat Brazil as a poor country. It's a very rich country, but with extreme concentration. So it's very hard to make possible a collective project. If there is an event that can be done in such a scale, and it must be educative and must be collective by its very nature. So in the story of Bienal, this was very constitutive, beyond being an educational project and one of the most, the oldest experiments in education in the world, considering it's being continuous. The Bienal, it was founded with a mission of constructing bridges between fields that did not speak to each other. So this is something that made it legitimate and made it exist for 60 years. So the problem, the discussion on education, it includes the educational department, which is permanent, very broad. It has a nexus of research, a nexus of diffusion, elaborating materials, editorial materials, a material that will be launched in this first semester to be worked with teachers and students in all the city, and also distributed through the internet. So this is an educational issue that's fundamental, and has not been interrupted in the last 20 years, but it's been there since the second Bienal. Aracia Aramau, her first job was being educational monitor in Bienal São Paulo. So beyond this, thinking curatorship in Brazil in such a scale, you must have a commitment, you must be committed, not in a paternalistic sense, but in a sense of constructing something open work, Bienal as an open work. It's not a matter of proving our desires, our fetish, or our thesis and just present them, but that's what Jacopo was trying to say since the beginning. It's to start a process that will be completed only with the other, which is the audience. So in this moment, we have an activity that very great activity from the professionals that are on the educational team with what we are doing, in the sense that these activities, the budgets, the fluxes, they have this. They have their characteristics, but we are talking about the same things. But this educational material is talking about attention. This will be released soon, but it's committed to understand that understanding one artwork, it doesn't mean just facing this object. It means facing in a certain context, in a certain time, within a certain group of works. So this is what being emphasized in these artists that are coming back. Between 1/3 and 1/4 of artists will have participated of other exhibitions. So that's not a detail. This is something that's constitutive of this experience, that is thought not to please us or to prove us, but as a policy in a broad sense, an action for the collective. Good evening. My name is Raquel. It's a question for the table. I'm not sure if it's a question, but a reflection. It seems to me that the party, the drawing that you are doing for this Bienal has something interesting, which is the word that appeared more often is the term opacity. Opacity can be thought in different ways. If we think on the theory of cinema, it's always a reflection about the cinema that works through transparency, the idea of something that is given to the audience, and this it's always a window that the movie will put you in a relationship, in a teleology, a narrative. Why am I thinking about this? Sahamaraji also used this term, an author that speaks about translation, and he speaks about transparency and opacity in this key that the language would, the translation would always bring an opacity, because there is something that's not translatable. There is something that is impossible. to be understood. The other is not possible to be understood. So this term, it echoes in something else. We can see in the PowerPoint the object that that give us a memory of what the other curator has said. So this is so beautiful, but also speaks of a way to expose and to bring speech to a very interesting operation of opacity. It's not an image after the other, but it's an image over the other. That's something that I was thinking, and that's something for the table if you want to answer as you want to answer. But the idea of an hypothesis to be tested, and that's the term. Opacity is very very well put in this moment, as far as I have understood. Considering the space as a provocation, the artist will have to respond to this spatial provocation, and also the idea of provocation of the audiences. The education team is not working anymore as something. They're not doing the same thing again. They're being dislocated. The Bienal is being moved, dislocated. There are different ways of operating. So there you have the opacities. We can also think of hypotheses that we will be testing. Possibilities of solution and of doubting. I'm not sure if I am being able to put myself, but it seems to me that this word is very interesting. So I'd like to know how, for Jacopo, this occult factor, that joins all these people together, each one that has spoken here, it worked differently, but we have situations for the publications that will work a text that will not reveal itself, but will bring a problematic. It works almost as a poetic, not as a theory. But these are all hypotheses to be tested. The space that provokes the artist, the object, the artwork that comes back in time. So these are relationships that I am being able to think about this term, opacity and transparency, and this occult factor that it seems to join you all. So this is a provocation. You will decide if you want to enter or not. Thank you, Raquel. I think you touched several aspects. I'm not sure if I will be able to answer all of them. It would be very complicated, but a few aspects that perhaps because we spoke a lot. One of the words that has been a key for us, and has been a key in a sense, because our reference is Glissant, but the way Glissant talks about opacity is not so different as Sahamaraja that you cited. One of the phrases that he repeats all the time, and you can. Repetition is also something very important for us. Glissant has a very circular writing. One of the phrases that he always repeats is that he speaks in front of all the languages of the world, in spite of speaking only one language. He understands the importance of all the languages in spite of not speaking all of them. So he makes the effort of understanding and of not understanding. That's different from them. The idea of assuming that you only understand something or someone that's completely transparent is a posture that's very close to what I have been trying to stigmatize. If the other won't understand everything, he's your enemy. So this not opening to the opacity of the other, that's something that's fundamental. So thank you very much. I'll thank you because the idea of PowerPoint was his. thank you for your observation of how it was done, because you have realized, if you have seen something about the graphic project, Victor Cesar, it's always over superposition, where the significance, the meaning will only be possible by the superposition of all these parts. So as they are partially given, if you look attentively to the graphical project, you will understand that you will never be able to understand everything. Everything is given, but there is not only one meaning. So that's why you understood completely something that how we were working. We bring each one will bring, we agree partially, we disagree partially, but there is never a perfect fit between one thing and another. These corners, these images, each one of a format, of a temperature, they will never coincide. And we are all like this, and everyone's like this. So the effort is to understand that you don't have to coincide completely. You don't have to be exactly equal. This diversity is the way we are trying to approach this concept of opacity that Glissant presents us so strongly. There's only one phrase, a complementary translation. The idea of transparency, the promise of transparency, beyond being false, in general, it's the curse of a project of power that's totalizing, that tends to fascism, it tends to destructing the other, that tends to colonialism. It's a model of a Western civilization, colonizing. So it's useless to say this purity is usually I want my purity. No, we have to say this purity is useless, and it only will work if you kill us every day, literally and symbolically. The word that I want, not the word of my purity, is the word that you recognize that your purity is false, and that I don't have to be equal to you, and it's okay, because there will be always something in me that you won't be able to understand, and that I desire, and you might desire. And that's in this possibility of tension, of cut, of relation, of friction and contamination, circulation, that a lot of that exists will come to life.
To say, from a personal point of view, and this is a very personal thing. At the beginning, when Jacopo invited me, I think from all of us, and this is the way how I work, maybe, because I always engaged with political theater and performance. I was always like, okay, but what we really want to talk about? No, I was really looking for a subject, and for me, of course, was always related to political situation. And for me, it has been a very interesting exercise, and I think it was through the methodology, because, as I said before, I was always looking for a subject to fight, as I always do. So in a way, the methodology of putting together these ideas and these different labels and the different chapters in this biennial has been also helping me to understand, in a way, different ways of approaching multiple subjects. So I think this idea of how you engaged with us through this methodology has been much more useful. Although I still want to fight for certain things, of course, but I think it was very, very important, the methodology of how we have been working together.
My name is Adelaide. I would like to ask, we are in very dark times in Brazil, and the Ministry of Culture being dismantled. The entire country is being dismantled. So the decision of a Bienal that is distributed along a year throughout the city, it's also a very expensive project. How was the issue of resources, of budget, and if this decision was a tactic, was it a strategy, or if it was a desire of a broad front of culture? On the point of view, on the first question about the project being expensive, yes, it is expensive as any other Bienal. but as much as any other, not so different because, and then I'll answer the second part of your question. It used to be very strong in this project, the idea of creating an answer, a collective answer, not pamphletary, but showing that we are together in a moment such as this. And exactly because of this, and I speak very honestly, and to myself, to Paulo that did this work. This project was very received very enthusiastically by all the institutions that we spoke with, and then afterwards there were invitations of other institutions that wanted to be part of. So as this is a joint effort, it makes the cost for Bienal not so great. So being very direct, the institutions that have resources to pay for these exhibitions, even if they are part of Bienal, they are paying. So Bienal doesn't pay the exhibition in Pinacoteca or in Sesc or in MASP. These institutions don't need, but Bienal helps, and I'm very proud of it. Will help exhibition in Casa do Povo and people places where the Bienal will be able to give an institutional message saying that it had, on the personal and collective point of view, had a role in constructing a cultural scene of contemporary art in Brazil. It continues. It wants to continue to have it. I'm not saying that this is the format. What we're doing an experimentation, and we are supporting immediately and unconditionally by this institution because this is the desire of the foundation. It's a Bienal that's more expensive than the last one, for instance, but there is an influence also that the dollar is more expensive now, so this is much more important on the budget than this is Brazil. This is how it works here. So it's a very ambitious project, but on my point of view, it's an ambitious project that will free us to make an exhibition that's much more intimate, much more cared, and this is what we're trying to do. Hello, my name is Thais. I love to hear what you had to tell us. I have high expectations towards this Bienal. I was trying to find a way to provoke you, but then I thought I didn't want to be in your place to try to react in a curatorial jest with an exhibition in this moment that is so hard for culture and for art in Brazil. But it's a lie. I wanted to be in your place. That's a lie. I think it's a huge opportunity because in these moments that we are low, the institutions that are more solid as Bienal, they start to do a lot of difference. They call a lot of attention. So then I thought, what curatorial gestures would be able to face a situation that we are living? Adelaide said by the cultural ministry that has been extincted, censorship, cuts of budget. It's an attack, very aggressive. And what kind of gesture could face this? I understand this strategy of trying to make it to spread the Bienal through several corners, but then I was thinking again, call the institutions where the money is still, where the banks is. Couldn't you be a little bit more radical? Okay. We also have Sesc in the outskirts of the city that must be valued. How to reach this culture and these artists? that are as always suffering a lot and on the tip of everything, and they have their career cut because it's not possible being an artist when we are living in misery. Or and actually it's a situation that for many people here, I am a teacher. I have my students that they want to be artists, but they can't because they have to do something else. Is it inside the field of Bienal to do something about this? Would it be more radical to investigate these cultures on the sources where they are born? We see artists doing this. This is something that came to my mind. Work from Barbara Wagner in the last Bienal. She goes where things are being produced. Is it possible to reach, to imitate models of public policies that used to work? Looking at these resistances, do you propose to do this? This is more provoking that I would like to hear from you. I would like to hear the others as well. I'll speak quickly, but Paulo, others can speak. I think it's always possible to be more radical, for sure. But I also think that Bienal is a unique place, as I said. It's not a cultural center, it's not a museum, it's something that transcends everything. It's the only place where people from social classes, places, cultural levels, very different, they come. So I'm not sure if Bienal is the place to do the most radical thing. I'm not sure. I don't think we're doing something radical. I think we are doing a gesture that is responding to the moment that we are living. And coming to the start of your question, many people said, oh, that's such a difficult moment. Yes, it's a very difficult moment, but it's a very interesting moment to do such a Bienal, because Bienal is something important. I think this. So if I have to say which other exhibitions of contemporary art have the importance that Bienal has, none. There's a phrase from Agamben. There is something that I always think, only because art stopped being in the sphere of interest and it became something interesting, that it became something easy. He compares art today with what was art in Roman times. So this sphere of the interest that's occupied by Bienal. So this is a unique opportunity, especially in a moment like the one that we are living. So I think in this place, you can be relatively radical, but not excessively. I say this very easily because I know that not everyone will agree, and this is a theme for endless discussions, and this is something that makes our project very rich as well. Thinking on historical perspective, Bienal has a wave effect. So Bienal in the 60s years was the most radical institution that has existed. No. But the fact that it exists for so many years, did it make a difference on forming the sensibility of people, of researchers, of artists, of curators, of the people that work there? Yes, I'm sure about this. So this is the phrase of Thiago de Mello. The first thing that we want to face, and this is we are listening from many artists, the first thing we want to face in the moment that we are living, it's to continue to live. And to do this in a socializing way, meeting and contaminating others. This is the step that Bienal will do, considering its size in a cascade effect. It would be able to go much further, yes, but it starts on this natural speakers and has the effort to do these levels. If we had more years and more money, we would be able to continue. But this is not a public policy, it's an event. But more than ever, it's trying to think that we just exist because there are relationships inside it and around it. but the anxiety going back, thinking differently, and thinking of our historical precedents and artists as Thiago de Mello and artists as Rufino and others that live dictatorship in Brazil. The moments as such as we are living now, they don't expect us to speak as high as them. They will react on the skin level. So, exchanging opinions, this is something that will exist. The consequences are beyond our control. But the only things that we don't want since the beginning is to create an artifice to seem to be answering if no one saw, just to exist in social networks, to exist in an essay, in a commentary. We want this answer to be in the experience and not in the slogan, not in the hashtag, but in the process. This is one of the main difficulties that we have. And this is made by the moment. We get very much satisfied in checking in. We don't live the conflicts, the disputes, the wills, the desires, the encounters, the emotions. We just check it. We just check them. If art can be something, it's something else and not checking. This is something we will find out. My name is Mael. I'd like to congratulate you for your proposition. I've been present in several meetings and occurred to me through your audacity. Lisette opened a Bienal with debates prior to the Bienal, and many of the debates ran from the control because there are very different voices that were questioning this model that was conventional of art shows, in the sense of a curatorial hypertext, because it starts on the premise or in a thesis and is searching for works that will prove it, or it starts on a kaleidoscope and tries to sue it. Bernardo Carvalho, a writer and a friend, he said something and his text was censored because he provoked this issue, saying that the works speak much more than this curatorial hypertext. So considering this and the title of this Bienal, though it's dark still, I think, the dark makes me think of a Gambling that you also mentioned, and they are contemporaries, different. What is contemporary is not what's is in time, but what it's outside of time, in the sense that it's dark. It talks a lot about darkness, and seeing in darkness, it doesn't mean not seeing. You see something. So Bernardo, about Lisette, says the problem of several biennales is that you try to bring a light on an artist that just wants to show darkness and to give light to darkness. It's diminishing. It's killing it. So this is a question for you, the curatorial challenge, which is for you to sing. Will it be a poiesis? Do you pretend the text to not your conduct? We are all on the expectations, but how can you sing this darkness? A minimal answer, but I think this desire of so many individuals articulated, it's a reverence to how much the artists constitute a poetic that will go beyond any reading, any curatorial perspective. It's sharing with the public, saying we constructed this articulation, but the artist constructs many others around and beyond. So this is the commitment with art and artists. And about the text, these letters that started being published today on the website and through email, these are the start of this exercise. Afterwards, you can go look for it. The artist. Oh, you read it. Mentioning Petrarca, that it was singing. So it's entered. There is an issue that you mentioned, and then I think it's very valid, which is about the methodology that we adopted. We started. Carla doesn't know how to explain herself very well. We didn't start on themes. We have a resistance to this kind of approach. So I agree in this case totally with Bernardo de Carvalho. We started exactly because of this on the works. The themes came from the works. It's not the theme that we tried to fit the works. This is a ontological problem. That's not by chance that one of the aspects that we chose to speak about it. We are actually on the opposite perspective. But you also see on individual exhibitions 2 readings that are possible. You have the solo, or you see the same work in the pavilion and have another reading. But this is metonymic of what you could imagine on all the several readings that are possible. So in this sense, the curator is not this stereotypic curator that they want to impose their perspective. We want the opposite. We want to create a process that will make possible to understand how that artwork never stops having a meaning. With other words, this is what Glissant calls opacity. You have to understand that this darkness doesn't have to be cleared.
Sorry, one thing. And also, I think the idea of, like, when Carla was explaining the statements, no, like these objects, this situation, I think in a certain way we are also trying to avoid as much as we can, like writing curatorial statements where you will go through different clusters or through different themes, where you will explain, okay, the objects in this section will talk about this and that, but it's really, you explain a situation almost in an oral way, like in a story, no? And this story will be written also in a very, sometimes in a very poetic way, sometimes not, depending. But it's through this situation where you could create the connection and not just explaining, okay, this group of works will, I think they're around this. So that was also very, very important.
Hello, my name is Gisele. I'd like to listen from you a little bit. What do you think about Bienal as a model? If we think historically, Bienal as a format, it has already filled empty spaces in Brazil. It has been a means to get in touch with artworks from international artists that otherwise would never get here. And tendencies and languages and research, things that were happening outside. And throughout the years, this has been changing. And now, recently, we started talking about crisis of Bienal in this model, and there were a few discussions about the size of Bienal. It's a very big exhibition, and discussing how the audience could make the fruition of this artwork in this gigantic space that make you anguished with all these layers of meanings and associations. So we have many biennales around the world. You mentioned Venice, that's so traditional. We abandoned all the national representations, so I was thinking I would like to hear from you. What do you think actually what Bienal has to fill as a proposition? I don't want to say that it's a function. That's not it. But what this model must fill with this size, with this the size of the how many artworks.
Thank you for the question, actually, because it's a very interesting aspect. I believe the Biennale is one of the most interesting model of exhibition per se. It is first, Biennale as a definition relies in a vagueness, because we usually talk about the number of Biennale, as there were many. What they have in common is a temporality, and that's it. They don't have in common their size, their scope, and their organization. And I believe it's interesting as a model, being something, an exercise again, but that it resides on a time and space much more than any exhibition can do. Great exhibition in museums, they don't tend usually, as a constitution, to respond. Maybe they respond to time, to our times, but not necessarily to the space. And therefore, the Biennale is defined by a Biennale by its location, even more maybe, and as well as its time. And every Biennale is developed different. As we know, the Sao Paulo Biennial is the second biennial, which was founded in 1951. Prior to this, only the Venice Biennial, which was founded in the late 19th century. And what is interesting is, as you mentioned before, the Biennale in Sao Paulo used to be, for the first decades until the 90s, a representation of different countries, besides an exhibition, a group exhibition. It stopped in the 90s, but the blueprint since 51 was the Venice Biennial itself. And what is interesting is that over times and over decades, the principle of the Sao Paulo Biennial, which was, as you said, to give a spotlight from the art that was coming from outside, it was overturned. Now it has become the main speaker and the main spotlight to the world of Latin American art, as the principle was inverted. And another aspect is that each Biennale is directed by a different group. So in a way, they are defined by discontinuity based on the time and space factors. The rest is discontinuous. Therefore, they reside also as a chain to the previous. We studied a lot the previous exhibitions, of course, and you cannot propose a Biennale without looking at the past, whereas other exhibitions are more free in this sense. Therefore, to go back to your question, what a Biennale needs, well, surely certain approach are about giving answers. Others are about posing questions and posing problematics, not relying into the comfortable state of this is how we should do it. This is the thesis you should follow through the selection of works. And therefore, in our case, we are trying to create a platform for people to think. I'm not saying in a rhetorical sense, to think in reading of the works, how the work can help to even more integrate the relationship between a greater public and what art can express. And so far from what is seen as a ideological way to see art. Like these, as Ruth was saying and others was saying before, this is what an art will tell you. Well, we hope is much more, and this is what we try to do, and we are doing it. In a way, we haven't done it. We are doing it, and it's growing. So ourselves, we are not here on any sort of privileged position to teach anyone anything.
Hello, good evening. I am Cleston, and I think since the dictatorship until now, the question is playing with this idea. How are you going to deal with what the Brazilian and the people from São Paulo they sing? There is a lot of poetry going on in the outskirts, and the slams and the meetings of poetry and singing. There's a lot going on the outskirts. The act of singing. How the act of singing is going to be received? How the Bienal will have it inside? Yes, there are a few works where singing it will be present literally. Several artists that deal of the strength of singing. It's clear that singing is a metaphor on the title, but what does it mean? This metaphor. What singing has of so special? Has of these things that we mentioned, has something that's not traducible. There is something that singing can say that the phrase that's not sang cannot say. Something that's always coming back to our conversations. There is a part of singing that reverberates in the body. It has to do with rhythm, with the heartbeat, knowing things differently. And then I think we are talking a little bit of resistance of naming groups of artworks, resistance of explaining. That's not a resistance that's for free. It's because we believe in other ways of knowledge that must be presented and must be put into action, other kinds of understanding that must be put into action, and ways of not understanding as well. So singing has a relationship with the rhythms, and singing has something about the core of singing together that's important for us. So singing is being understood in several ways. So in this sense, it will be present in several ones. Just to complete and also say Saturday, the performance from Nelmo Younger, performance artist, composer from South Africa, he will share with us a subversion of Amazing Grace song, which is a great hymn of the fight for abolitionism from black music, Anglo-Saxon culture, hymn of union that you sing after great disasters, but it's also a song that's written by a white British man that used to work with slave traffic in the Atlantic Triangle and passed through several situations of near death. And in the third situation, he said he was eliminated. he was converted. He became a priest, and he became an abolitionist. It's a beautiful story, but very hard and very complex, much more than what this song is understood in general. So he will bring this internal contradiction and reincorporate this song with a collective of actors and singers, of black singers here in São Paulo, that will occupy the the empty space of the pavilion, and these several artists will bring this song and transform it, evoke it, and give it back the voices that are the voices that were subjects, the protagonists and the resistance of the abolitionist process, the African blacks, the Brazilian blacks, that will come back in the sonorities, in the sounds, in the texts, and recompose a song that was in a few minutes into something that is hours. The whole empty space will be part of this. So I think there's a few ways that we would be able to share this idea of the title in a better way. So we invite you. We think it will be a very special moment that speaks a lot of these situations.
But for instance, also like thinking about different ways of singing, and I don't want to talk about all the works that in the biennial, but for instance, the performance, the performance, and I think also because through performance and the use of the body, a lot of these things come out. It's like, for instance, in April with the Words of Others, that is also the other project that will happen in April, is also this work by Leon Ferrari, who spent a lot of time in Brazil also during the dictatorship. And he wrote this piece that is basically the accumulation of hundreds and hundreds of quotes from the Vietnam War, from the Bible, from the Second World War and the Nazis, no? And all these sentences that were said by different people, mostly like political leaders, so you understand the rhetoric that they are using. But when I remember when we did it for first time, it seems like something. I mean, all the things that they are singing, in a way, they are horrible. But at the moment that you have like 50, 60 people reading together as a collective reading all these sentences. I don't know, you feel this capacity of transformation. You don't need to read things from the present, because things from the past are very similar in a way with what is happening today. But it's this idea of through the collective reading, what also Carla was explaining with the beats, I don't know, that it will be part also of this second performance together with the Neo Mujanga that is happening now.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. Hope you can go on Saturday and on the other events that we will organize. Thank you very much.